program. The crew is go for launch. Roger. Nice to be in orbit. We have followed in their footsteps to get us where we are today.
Good afternoon or evening if you're watching from the East Coast. It's Saturday, May 1st, here at SpaceX's headquarters in Hawthorne, California. We are currently awaiting Crew Dragon's departure from the International Space Station and make its way back to planet Earth. On screen is a view from Johnson Space Center, just right outside of Houston. We expect Dragon Resilience to push away from the space station at approximately 5:35 p.m. Pacific time with our Crew 1 astronauts, Crew 1 astronauts, Mike Hopkins, Victor Glover, Shannon Walker, and Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency astronaut Soichi Noguchi. Right on screen is a view of Dragon. It is nighttime at the International Space Station, so you can get, I guess, half of the Dragon right there. If you joined us earlier, you know that the crew is suited and the Dragon and station hatches are sealed in preparation for departure. My name is Andy Tran, and I'm a production supervisor here at SpaceX. I am super excited to bring you live coverage of Crew Dragon completing its second trip to space with people on board as part of NASA's first official long-duration mission for our commercial crew program. Joining me today is NASA Public Affairs Officer Leah Cheshire. I am super excited.
Thanks, Andy. It's awesome to be here, and we have got quite a night ahead of us. So once Dragon departs station, the crew's flight home is expected to last roughly 6.5 hours. Upon departure, Dragon will use its Draco engines to thrust away from the station in a series of carefully choreographed maneuvers, or 4 departure burns, to increase the distance between the spacecraft and the space station.
After that comes deorbit, entry, and landing, which covers all operations after the final departure maneuver. That includes trunk separation, a deorbit burn, closure of the nose cone, deployment of the drogue, and then main parachutes, and finally splashdown off the Florida coast, at which point our teams will recover Mike, Victor, Shannon, and Soichi. Dragon is targeted to splash down off the coast of Panama City, Florida, in the Gulf of Mexico at 11:57 p.m. Pacific time, followed by the crew getting picked up at sea by one of SpaceX's recovery vessels.
Today on board the space station is the Expedition 65 crew, led by JAXA astronaut and Crew 2 crew member Aki Hoshide, who just arrived to station a week ago and took over as station commander from NASA's Shannon Walker. As a reminder, just like during its approach to the International Space Station, Dragon's departure and deorbit is designed to be fully autonomous, requiring no action from the crew on board. NASA astronaut Shane Kimbrough will be watching the undocking and departure from the cupola, but the prime departure monitoring role falls on Mike Hopkins and Victor Glover from inside Dragon. Mission controllers in Houston and Hawthorne will back them up. Now let's go over to Brandy Dean at the Johnson Space Center to talk a bit about how the station crew have been preparing to send the crew home and what we can expect from here until Dragon departs the station. Brandy?
SpaceX on the Big Loop for undocking briefing.
Thanks, Leah. With 11 people on board the International Space Station, it has been a busy few days, although they got a few extra days with the delay in departure. However, they have made the most of it. Over the last several days, the astronauts worked to pack Dragon full of cargo for the return journey. Besides its 4 crew members, Dragon's going to be returning more than 260 kilograms or 570 pounds of cargo back to Earth. About half of that is samples from research projects on board the International Space Station, including multiple powered freezers packed with samples. All of this will get unloaded after we get the crew out following splashdown. From there, it'll be sent to researchers around the country for final analysis. The crews also removed emergency hardware that was kept inside Dragon during docked operations and transferred back to the space station, and they took time to get their SpaceX suits unpacked.
0030 for the start of the sequence. Visors are closed and secured, and we are a go for the undock.
We copy, you are go, and your visors are down. Thank you.
Station Houston on the Big Loop. Perform steps 2 through end in 1.602 Dragon departure monitoring.
Heard Commander Mike Hopkins there from the Dragon, letting the team on the ground know that they were ready for undock and had their visors down. That is part of the procedure of getting ready for their departure from the space station. Since getting the hatches closed, Mike Hopkins and Victor Glover suited up and strapped in. We saw some of Soichi Noguchi and Shannon Walker's suit up in real time earlier this afternoon. But now all 4 astronauts are in their seats and standing by for undocking. We've got a final go, no-go coming up in a few minutes where the joint SpaceX and NASA teams make their final call for Dragon to depart the station. That's one of many checkpoints in the return that will continue all the way up until just before the deorbit burn, giving mission managers multiple chances to assess the weather at the splashdown zones and making sure everything is lining up before Dragon departs. So we'll stand by for that final go, no-go, but for now everything's continuing to look good for an on-time departure. And with that, I'll throw it back over to Andy and Leah in Hawthorne.
Thanks for the update, Brandy. And as you heard, we just got the confirmation that from Mission Control here in Hawthorne and Houston and the Dragon crew, Crew Dragon Resilience is a go to undock. So now we're waiting for the undocking sequence to begin, and that'll happen. It'll take about or less than 5 minutes for Dragon to separate from the International Space Station, where it has called home for almost 6 months.
The first step in the automated undocking sequence is for the umbilicals to retract. These umbilicals connect Dragon systems to the space station, transferring power, telemetry, and commands between the 2 vehicles throughout Dragon's stay. Now, once that is complete, Dragon will unlatch itself from the space station by releasing the 12 hard capture hooks in 2 separate phases. All that combined will take roughly 4.5 minutes, and then Dragon will be ready to depart from the station and begin to push itself further and further away using its thrusters.
Dragon's initial departure from station is a little different from any other docked vehicles like the Soyuz that rely on springs to push them away from the docking port. Dragon will execute 2 short thruster firings to undock using a combination of the 12 Draco engines around the base of the capsule, with the first breaking any stiction between Dragon and the docking port, and the second slowly backing the spacecraft away. We're expecting the call for the undocking sequence to begin at about 5:30 p.m. Pacific time.
And once it's time for the 4 Crew 1 astronauts to deorbit and splash down back on planet Earth, they'll be heading to one of 7 targeted sites supported by SpaceX and NASA. All of these sites are located off the coast of Florida, either in the Gulf of Mexico or in the Atlantic Ocean. Spreading the supported sites across multiple locations helps to maximize the return opportunities for this mission and future crews, lowering the chance that we'll have to wave off due to bad weather.
In the lead up to today, NASA and SpaceX jointly selected primary and alternate splashdown locations off the coast of Panama City, our primary location, and Tampa as the alternate. The selection process works with a lot of different variables, including the space station's orbital trajectory, what landing sites are available and have favorable weather, how much free flight capability Dragon has for the trip home, and the sleep schedule for the returning crew members.
We'll start with calculating daily return options based off of the space station's current orbit and Dragon's capabilities to maneuver and line up for re-entry. The time from undock to landing at the primary site can vary from less than 6 hours to more than 39. Today, our primary landing site gets the crew home in about 6.5 hours from undocking. Certainly, getting home the quickest comes with some obvious benefits, but we always have to make sure that the crew is properly rested for dynamic operations, preventing us from scheduling 20-plus hour days for them. Trajectory and ballistics experts provide the daily opportunities that would line up Dragon with 7 landing zones and split them into what we call ascending and descending opportunities.
Dragon uses its Draco thrusters after leaving station to execute a series of altitude-lowering maneuvers and to line up with the selected primary site. It can also change to different alternate sites while in free flight if sudden weather moves in that we want to avoid. And weather is something that we're constantly looking at, making the final call to proceed about 2.5 hours before the crew undocks. For the Crew 1 return, we'll be looking at a number of weather items. Some of the obvious ones are no rain or chance of lightning in the recovery zone, both for the safety of the crew inside the capsule and the recovery teams on the water. We're also looking for wind speeds less than 15 feet a second, or about 10 miles an hour, and relatively calm seas so we can safely execute recovery operations, which includes landing a helicopter on the recovery ship to fly Mike, Victor, Shannon, and Soichi back to Florida. Once Dragon is flying free, we'll have a number of additional checkpoints to either proceed towards the primary landing site, head to the alternate, or select a new zone based on real-time weather data. These checks are happening all the way up until we are in the final hours before the deorbit burn, which is the last burn in the trip home and commits the Dragon capsule to re-entering the Earth's atmosphere.
And if you've been following along, the teams have been looking at return opportunities since Wednesday, April 28th, with weather being the major factor. We waved off our initial opportunities to undock on the 28th and on the 30th, with teams making the decision to pursue our current undocking and splashdown plan just yesterday. The weather conditions in the Gulf for tonight's attempt are ideal for splashdown and recovery, with very low wind speeds and almost glass-like sea states. This will be the first time we're bringing crew back in a nighttime splashdown, but we are well prepared.
SpaceX was able to practice for this very scenario with the return of the CRS-21 cargo mission, returning a similar Dragon capsule with a nighttime splashdown off the Florida coast. All of our recovery teams have practiced for recovery conditions at night, giving us confidence to carry this out this operation and bring the crew home safely. SpaceX also has additional personnel on the recovery ship to recover Dragon's parachutes and our standard set of medical professionals and Dragon technicians to secure the capsule and get the crew out quickly and safely. And another fun history fact for this return, this will be the first night splashdown of a U.S. crewed spacecraft since Apollo 8's pre-dawn return in the Pacific Ocean on December 27, 1968, with NASA astronauts Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Anders.
It's quite a while since we've had a nighttime splashdown with crew members on it. But again, like Leah said, we've been practicing this for years and have done extensive amounts of testing. If the mission teams were to wave off after undocking prior to the deorbit burn, the crew can remain on orbit for more than 60 hours before they have to come home. And after undocking, the trip home will take less than 3 days to either our primary or alternate locations. So the crew have 3 days worth of food and snacks on board, along with plenty of water.
And as Andy just mentioned, for today's undocking, Panama City is the prime splashdown location, and Tampa is the backup location for splashdown. And as a reminder, Dragon does have the capability to change alternate locations after undocking from station if bad weather happens to move in. And we are awaiting for that call to begin undocking in about 3 minutes, well, 2 minutes from now. And as we mentioned, it should take under 5 minutes for that undocking sequence to actually occur. So we won't see any movement right away at first from Crew Dragon. If we're able to get a view of it, I know it's still, they're in a night pass in their orbit around the Earth. So we'll be waiting, and we won't see that initial movement, but we have to see those hooks and latches retract, and then those 2 short burns.
Yeah, we should be hearing the call out again in a couple minutes here, and that will begin the sequence to start to pull away those hooks, and eventually Dragon will fire its thrusters to remove the stiction from its forward bulkhead and the station and begin to make its journey all the way back home to Earth.
And if you've been listening, we got our go for undock from the team here, as you can see in Mission Control Houston, as well as the team here in Hawthorne. About 10 minutes ago, got that final go to undock, and Crew Dragon Resilience radioed back that they are go as well. Hatches. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say we have some precious cargo on board with the 4 astronauts, but they're also bringing home quite a bit of cargo, additional cargo as well, over 250 kilograms worth of supplies, food, and stuff as well, and experiments to bring back with the return to Earth.
We heard them addressing in the previous show. We were watching Hatch Closure. They addressed the polar lockers, and those help us bring home science and research that's been conducted on station that needs to be refrigerated. So it's a wonderful capability of Crew Dragon that we're able to get that back to Earth to be analyzed, and so that the teams here on Earth that put together those investigations can take a look.
And all of that cargo is being stored in the pressurized section, or sort of the capsule section of Dragon. Sometimes we can store objects in the trunk, but later on you'll see that we actually eject the trunk.
SpaceX undock sequence commanded.
We actually undock the trunk in preparation for re-entry.
Advanced copies, we see the same.
That's the call we were looking for, right on time at 5:30 p.m. Pacific time. Crew Dragon and the International Space Station flying 260 statute miles southwest of Liberia. You can see a picture of Crew Dragon there in the center of the screen.
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop. Umbilical demate complete and nominal.
It's copies.
And the first step has been complete, that umbilical demating that provided power and data from International Space Station to Dragon.
So now with Dragon getting ready to undock and the umbilicals have separated, let's go to Brandy in Mission Control at Johnson Space Center for updates.
Thanks, Sadie. That confirmation of the umbilical retraction means that a series of steps have been set off. Right now, the first set of 6 out of 12 hooks should be retracting. That starts just a split second after the undock command is sent. There are 2 sets of 6 for 12 in total. Take about 4.5 minutes in all to unhook, after which time the Dragon will be able to begin performing a series of undocking burns to move itself away from the space station. Again, that first set of 6 hooks should be retracting right now. Live view here of the Dragon from the cameras on board the International Space Station. When it does move away from the space station, you should be able to see that in real time. Again, waiting as the 12 hooks that are holding the Dragon to the space station begin to unhook.
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop. First set of hooks open and nominal.
It's copies, we see the same.
Confirmation there from the core in Hawthorne that the first set of hooks was able to unlatch as expected. Now working on that second set of 6 hooks. Those 12 hooks have been holding the Dragon to the space station. And once they've all retracted, the Dragon will begin to perform a series of burns that will move it away. That's still about a minute or so away. First undocking burn should come at 7:34 p.m. Central Time. The first burn is only a minute and a half, or second and a half long, and will be quickly followed by a 5-second burn, undock burn 2, at 7:35. And then almost immediately after that, a 16-second departure burn 0. Halfway through that second set of hooks.
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop. All hooks open and nominal.
Dragon copies, we see separation.
Mike Hopkins there confirming what you're seeing on the screen. Dragon moving away from the International Space Station.
Dragon separation visually confirmed.
And SpaceX concurs.
That undocking taking place at 7:35 p.m. Central Time, 5:35 p.m. Pacific, while the station and Dragon were 260 miles above Mali. That wraps up Crew 1's stay on the International Space Station, begun in November, and puts them on a path.
SpaceX on the big loop, depart burn 0 complete, nominal burn.
Advance copies, we see the same.
And confirmation there of the first of several good burns taking place. Again, there are 2 undocking burns that occur almost back to back, and those will be followed by departure burn 0. That's the first of 4 departure burns, known as, again, departure burn 0. It's a short firing of the Dragon's Draco thrusters, lasting 16 seconds and increasing the Dragon's speed by just under half a mile. That gets Dragon flying away from the space station and sends it on a trajectory that will take it up and around the space station.
Resilience departing. Have a safe trip back home and the soft landings.
Station firm, resilient. Thanks for your hospitality. Sorry we stayed a little bit longer. We'll see you back on Earth.
Be back in a couple of months.
Space Station Commander Aki Hoshide, they're bidding Crew 1 goodbye as they move away from the International Space Station. Again, that departure burn 0 was complete and nominal, so that sets the crew on their way home for the day. Again, we did have undocking right on time at 7:35 p.m. Central Time, 5:35 p.m. Pacific. The station was flying 260 miles over Mali. We're going to be monitoring Crew Dragon throughout the departure sequence as it makes its way from the International Space Station. So wishing Mike, Victor, Shannon, and Soichi safe travels on their way home. But to take you through the rest of the departure sequence, I'll be sending you back over to Leah and Andy and Hawthorne. Thanks.
Thanks, Brandy, and great to see that successful undocking of Crew Dragon Resilience. You can still see it on your screen. The station is in an orbital nighttime. That's where this view is coming from. But very cool on the right-hand side, those 2 white dots.
Station step 4, ISS thrusters enabled.
Houston copies.
Those 2 white dots on the spacecraft, those are actually the windows. So that is our crew of 4 inside, now beginning their journey back to Earth, having departed right on time. Dragon ship Resilience is now on a trajectory to move up and over the station before additional maneuvers will change its orbital path to take it below and in front of the station. Dragon will autonomously accomplish that through 3 additional departure burns to get the 4 astronauts of Crew 1 well away from the space station and on their way home.
Yeah, it's quite interesting that Dragon decides to move up and over. The way I like to think about it is if you've ever watched a track race, when they start the track race, they stagger the folks, and the person in the outer lane is sort of gets a head start, so to speak. But that's because the distance it takes to travel around the lap is much greater for the person further away from the center. And so with Dragon, what we do is Dragon and International Space Station are generally speaking traveling at the same speed. And so if we just move it up to a higher orbit, it'll move relatively slower than the International Space Station, which would just clear it. And then once it's clear, it can start to fire those thrusters again and make its way underneath the International Space Station and be clear of any potential sort of collisions. So you may have noticed that our average time from liftoff to the International Space Station is somewhere between 23 and 24 hours. But when we leave, it's a lot quicker. It's because we don't have any hold points during departure sequence, right? We can just kind of undock and start to head home with all of our burns. It takes a lot less time to leave than arrive. Any second now, we are expecting the next departure burn, the second of 4. This burn will increase the initial opening rate between Crew Dragon and the space station.
And even though this is known as Departure Burn 1, it, like you mentioned, is the second. We just completed Depart Burn 0, which was about 16 seconds, and this one should be about 21 seconds long. So we are standing by any moment now for that call.
And we are continuing to see a view from the International Space Station. There goes the Draco engines firing. That is Dragon. And those two white lights, the solid white lights, again, are the windows. And I'm sure the crew is looking back at the International Space Station as they continue to depart.
And we just got a note that Depart Burn 1 has started. As we mentioned, this is
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop. Depart Burn 1 is complete. Nominal burn. You are go to doff your suits per procedure 4.012. Cameras are already external. Reminder that ground will be deactivating the big loop following exit from the approach ellipsoid.
And SpaceX resilience copies good Depart 1 burn. We have a go to dock the suits 4.012 and copy on the comm.
And it was over about as soon as it started. That Depart Burn 1 lasting about 21 seconds, and that came around 5 minutes after separation tonight. This burn will increase the initial opening rate between Crew Dragon and the space station. And we heard that the crew is now go to take off their spacesuits, so they don't have to wear their suits until it's time to really start the deorbit procedures. They can be in those comfort garments and be comfortable inside the vehicle. We really just want them to have those suits on and be in their seats for those first major burns as we leave the International Space Station, and then once again when we come back into Earth's atmosphere.
Yep, continuing to get good news all around with undocking, departure, and the second of 4 burns complete. We're now waiting for Dragon to exit the keep-out sphere and the approach ellipsoid. The keep-out sphere is an imaginary sphere 200 meters in diameter around the station. It's one of several safety zones set up to govern visiting spacecraft either arriving or departing the station. Before moving into the keep-out sphere, the spacecraft would have to be configured where they would not cross the imaginary boundary for at least 4 orbits, even if the spacecraft were to somehow lose control of its maneuvering.
The approach ellipsoid, or AE, is another imaginary shape, this time a 3-dimensional ellipsoid measuring 4 kilometers by 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers. It's in the same family as the keep-out sphere. One of the key differences with the AE is that vehicles outside of it have to be on what we call a 24-hour safe free drift trajectory. So similar, but this means that the spacecraft would not cross into the approach ellipsoid for at least 24 hours again.
Station Houston on the big loop. Dragon has exited the keep-out sphere.
Station copies, thanks.
Crew Dragon now outside the keep-out sphere, still inside that approach ellipsoid, and the next burn will be Depart Burn 2. That comes up at 6:28 Pacific time, so a little less than 45 minutes from now. That's a 44-second burn. That keep-out sphere, as we mentioned, one of several safety zones set up to govern visiting spacecraft either arriving or departing the station. Whether those have crew members on them or not, we're always tracking what's in the vicinity or the neighborhood of our space station. So before moving in the keep-out sphere, we had to know that the spacecraft is configured to not cross that imaginary boundary for at least 4 orbits, even if it lost all control of its thrusters. And that can be a hold point at some times on the way uphill or the way to station, but as you've noticed on the way home, it's not somewhere that we have to hold. We can simply move right through it and continue the journey.
And Dragon continuing to distance itself from the International Space Station. We'll hear a call here shortly that it has passed the approach ellipsoid, a bit bigger of an imaginary shape around the International Space Station with an ellipsoid measuring 4 kilometers by 2 by 2. This is another view of Dragon, getting a little bit of light. Again, you can see the windows right above the red and green lights.
We are looking for that approach ellipsoid exit to come up around 5:54 p.m. Pacific time, so less than 10 minutes from now. It is significantly bigger than the keep out sphere, but this is a cool picture of Dragon. You can see the capsule down toward the bottom of your screen and then the trunk near the top. And on the trunk on the white side, that's the radiator. It helps radiate heat, and I love this glow right now. The sun is coming up on the space station and onto Crew Dragon.
Wow, that is cool.
SpaceX resilience comm check on the cabin mic.
SpaceX on the big loop. I hear you loud and clear. How me?
We have you the same. Good comm check.
The International Space Station and Dragon are just over the Black Sea right now. They're moving so fast that they'll see a sunrise or sunset is every 90 minutes. 17,500 miles per hour is how fast they're moving.
And these movements that we see are camera moving. Dragon is moving itself, but not quite as quickly as we see these movements happening right now.
And just a few weeks ago, this crew and this vehicle had a bit of practice. On the first week of April, the crew had donned their spacesuits, entered the vehicle, and undocked and relocated themselves from one port to another. So that while they didn't quite exit the approach ellipsoid, they got pretty far out there where they had to turn on their LiDAR and redock with the International Space Station.
Yeah, it was definitely a dress rehearsal. All 4 crew members got suited up, got in their seats, strapped in, just in case that the redock did not occur. But as we saw, everything worked well. And that was to move Crew Dragon from the forward-facing port on the Harmony module to the space-facing port, where it just undocked from. And that leaves that space vacant. Crew 2 docked to the forward Harmony port last week when they arrived aboard Crew Dragon Endeavour. And now that the zenith-facing or space-facing port is empty, SpaceX Commercial Resupply Mission 22 can move in later this summer and bring along with it some research for the crew, food, supplies, as well as the new solar arrays that we'll be looking to install.
Yeah, it's going to be quite a busy year for the Dragon program. It's been an exciting couple of weeks with the relocation, Crew 2 heading on up there, now Crew 1 departing. And then, like Leah mentioned, we have a CRS mission in the summer, as well as 2 more crewed missions using the Dragon vehicle in the fall with Inspiration 4, as well as the Crew 3 mission, sorry.
And before Crew Dragon came home today, there were a long list of activities that needed to be checked off. Earlier this week, it's a very interesting thing to see, and I believe that there was a photo shared of it. I'm not sure by who, but the Canadarm2 was used to check out the exterior of the vehicle and look at the heat shield for any micrometeoroid or orbital debris. Obviously, they got a green light because they have departed. And we saw the crew suit up earlier, close their hatch. They also had to conduct some leak checks with the crew members themselves in their spacesuits, and as well as with the vestibule or the space between the International Space Station hatch and the hatch on Crew Dragon. We want that to be down to a vacuum so that when the crew members depart, it's equal to the vacuum of space.
So we're having a satellite handoff right now. We should get visuals back shortly here. But speaking of interesting photos, I was browsing the astronauts' Twitter, and as I mentioned earlier, Victor Glover's birthday was yesterday, and seems like they had a great night. There was a saxophone, there was balloons, cakes, and a keyboard involved, but all the astronauts seems like they are getting along very well with each other up there in space.
Yeah, I love, just seeing those real life pictures of what's happening on the International Space Station, because we know that they devote so much time and dedication to the science that's going on, because that's really why they are there. It's an orbiting laboratory that does research that benefits not only our future space exploration goals, but also all of us here on Earth. And so in their downtime, when they get to relax, some of them do play instruments. I've seen videos of what looks like to be a little space band.
Yeah.
It's a lot of the things we like to do here on Earth. They like to share meals together, watch movies.
Yeah, it's watching them do the science experiments, it definitely looks like they're like kids in a candy store. They are absolutely ecstatic about sort of how the properties of experiments will change in the microgravity environment. Again, we are waiting for the call out for Dragon to continue to distance itself from the International Space Station and eventually exit the approach ellipsoid. It's an imaginary ellipsoid around the International Space Station, measuring 4 kilometers by 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers.
We're looking for that to come up just a few minutes from now. It says 5:54 on Pacific time, so we'll be standing by for that. And this, like we mentioned earlier, with the keep out sphere, this is another place that you might stop on the way up and perform any checkouts before the vehicle gets closer to the space station. But on the way down, smooth sailing, we are clear to go. So we also heard the astronauts are now out of their suits, and I believe that was Mike Hopkins testing out the cabin microphone, which means it's not the microphone that is built into their suits. It's one that they're able to use and float around the capsule with. So that means they're out of their seats as well. I can only imagine they might be getting some views out the window of their home for the previous 6 months on the International Space Station.
It's going to be a very exciting couple of hours here coming up with the crew returning. I should mention that throughout tonight's broadcast, if you have any questions, we are taking questions. If you use the hashtag LaunchAmerica, we'll try to answer them here on air. We have one right here. Will we be able to see the capsule re-enter the atmosphere from the ground here in Florida, since it will be dark? I think so. We were talking earlier with the commercial crew program manager, and there's not a ton of clouds. If you are near Panama City or probably somewhere in Florida, you should be able to see a re-entry of the Dragon, depending on the cloud coverage.
When the capsule re-enters the atmosphere, it'll largely be over the water, so maybe a little out of sight for most people on land to see. But we did hear that there will be a lot of moonlight, so hopefully we get some good views. The best views that you'll get will be on this broadcast. We promise you that. Yeah. But it won't be the same as seeing those 4 main parachutes billowing as the capsule comes down.
So we are targeting splashdown just before midnight Pacific time. So if you are on the East Coast, you might have to stay up a little bit in order to see the splashdown.
Now, this view on the right-hand side of your screen, that's Mission Control Houston, the International Space Station Flight Control Center at Johnson Space Center. And so we are still in integrated operations. Now, the spacecraft Crew Dragon is still in the neighborhood of the International Space Station. So these teams work together in tandem to make sure all systems on both vehicles are set to what they need to be to make sure these procedures move smoothly. As we've seen, everything going well so far, and we're looking at just a minute or two until they exit the approach ellipsoid.
And it really has been a joint effort from not just SpaceX and NASA, but the FAA, the Coast Guard, in order to make sure that the crew undocks safely, returns home safely. So it cannot be stressed enough that it really is a team effort to make sure that everyone is doing their part and these astronauts are coming home safely.
As we mentioned earlier, this is NASA's first splashdown since 1968 with the Apollo 8 crew, which is one of my favorite missions. And this splashdown tonight also breaks a record. Not only has it been that long since we did a nighttime splashdown, but the capsule itself is now going to be the longest duration mission of an American crewed capsule in space. They're beating out the Skylab record from the final Skylab mission. That was 84 days, 1 hour and 15 minutes. And so we're coming home with 168 days here. I think they passed it.
Yeah. If you exclude Demo 2, Splashdowns don't happen too often nowadays, right? Most of the vehicles will land on land. The space shuttle landed itself. So, you know, while this may seem new and we haven't done this for decades, we have rehearsed this many times. And the Dragon 1 program splashed down every one of its vehicles, and we were able to recover most of it. So, you know, we are definitely expecting a safe return for all of our astronauts on board the capsule Resilience today.
And we should hear that call to exit the approach ellipsoid any minute now. That 4 kilometer by 2 kilometer by 2 kilometer invisible shape, invisible ellipse, we should say.
The imaginary sphere,
yes,
right?
Yes. It just helps us monitor vehicles as they arrive and they depart. So Crew Dragon undocked.
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop. Dragon has exited the approach ellipsoid and is on a safe free drift trajectory. Houston will be taking down the big loop shortly and expect ISS audio traffic to cease. Please swap your audio destination to Dragon to ground at your convenience and contact me for a comm check.
Get Dragon to ground up.
Dragon SpaceX on Dragon to ground comm check.
And SpaceX, this is Resilience on Dragon to ground. How copy?
I hear you loud and clear. How me?
And we've got you loud and clear as well. And if you could pass along the folks, we have a gorgeous view of the International Space Station.
Ah, that is great to hear. Wish we could see it too. Thanks for letting us know, and we'll certainly pass that along.
Well, when you guys get our tablets back, you just might find some photos on it.
Excellent to hear. We look forward to it. Thanks.
As you heard, Dragon Resilience has now exited the approach ellipsoid, that imaginary ellipsoid measuring 4 kilometers by 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers, in the same family as the Keep Out Sphere, which we saw them depart earlier. And we also heard them that they said they have a beautiful view of the International Space Station. So our hypothesis was right. They were definitely getting some last glimpses outside of the windows.
Yeah, I'm quite jealous. They probably have the best views in town. Next up is the third departure burn, and what we call departure burn 2. That's coming up at about around 6:27 p.m. Pacific time. It's going to be 44 seconds in duration, and it uses a combination of service section thrusters and forward bulkheads. So this is done at the orbital apogee, the lowest point in Dragon's lower Dragon's perigee to below the space station to start bringing it beneath and in front of the station's orbit.
And as you mentioned, that'll be depart burn 2, but it's really the third departure burn that we've seen.
Right.
Well, we had 2 short undock burns that helped us break the stiction and then begin moving away from the International Space Station. And then afterward, we had depart burn 0 lasting about 16 seconds and depart burn 1 lasting 21 seconds. Those are bringing the vehicle up and over the International Space Station. And then depart burn 2, as you mentioned, coming up at 6:28 Pacific time. That should be about 44 seconds long. And then the final major departure burn is depart burn 3. And we'll expect to see that at 7:14 p.m. Pacific or 2:14 GMT, lasting just over a minute long.
And SpaceX from Resilience, all 4 suits are connected and in drying.
We copy, thanks.
And that was Mike Hopkins confirming that they have doffed or taken off their suits and currently drying. Again, they will be putting them back on in a few hours from now in preparation for deorbit. But that graphic, so deorbit burn 3, the last burn, if you have joined us for last week's entry, it's known as sort of a co-elliptic burn. And what that means is after that burn is done, the Dragon vehicle will be at a constant 10 kilometers beneath the space station the entire way around its orbit. And then you get to its final deorbit burn where we'll start to decrease the altitude and eventually re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. And there are some other sequences that the vehicle will need to follow in order to splash back down.
The largest of these departure burns so far well, the longest, I should say, will be depart burn 3, and that's coming in just over a minute long, looks like 61 seconds. But the deorbit burn will last 16 minutes and 26 seconds. So about 16 and a half minutes of those 4 forward bulkhead Draco thrusters slowing Dragon down. And that'll be a retrograde firing. So those are pointing the thrusters in the direction that they're traveling. And this will change the perigee, or the lowest point of their orbit, and help them drop out of orbit around the Earth. And so that's what really commits them to their splashdown location and to coming home.
So we're continuing to track Dragon's journey back to Earth. This is a view of Johnson Space Center in Houston. We have a couple more questions from social media. Do all astronauts at the ISS keep on the same time zone, such as Eastern time zone or Pacific time zone? Yes, they follow Greenwich, GMT, Greenwich Mean Time. So that is sort of the nice halfway point between a bunch of different space agencies. So that is the time that they use, and you'll often see us calling out timelines in Pacific time zone because that's where we're at. But we also try to throw in GMT as well to make sure that the international folks and the astronauts also get their timelines correct.
And this question from Andrew: along with the members of Crew 1, what items return with the Crew Dragon capsule? Experiments, garbage, and space luggage? Yes to those, not necessarily garbage. We have different needs on our different vehicles, and one of the great things about Crew Dragon is it allows us to bring home cold science or cold stowage, things that need to be in powered lockers, refrigerators, essentially. That way they can be delivered to Earth and given quickly to the researchers here on the ground that have developed these investigations. So that is a lot of what returns with the Crew Dragon, as well as you mentioned the Crew 1 themselves, and there might be a little bit of space luggage in there. Each of the crew members gets to take up some personal items, and we don't necessarily know what those are because they are personal, but those come home with them as well.
And we saw earlier today when the astronauts were ingressing the capsule, the cargo is really packed in there and trying to make full use of all the volume inside of the capsule. There is some storage space underneath the seat at sort of the base of the Dragon vehicle where they can store some luggage as well. So yeah, so keep sending us these questions. I'm having a blast answering them. Again, the hashtag is LaunchAmerica.
And we have this one from Corey. Will the Crew 1 astronauts be able to look out the window as the capsule is returning through the atmosphere? Well, the windows definitely don't close, so the windows, they would be able to see out of them, but their seats will be actuated or somewhat reclined to about 40 degrees. So they'll be more so facing that upper hatch that we just saw them ingress or enter whenever they prepared to leave the space station. And those windows are on the sides of the forward hatch, or sorry, the side hatch, which is what they will exit later. So they won't really be in the peripheral, maybe, of the astronauts, but who knows?
They might be able to look really far down and see it through their corner of their eye, but as Leah mentioned, the seats actually actuate up, and so what's going to be in front of them are those 3 touchscreen LEDs with a ton of important information, such as telemetry, entry angle, and those are all important things that I'm sure the astronauts need to monitor to make sure that the Dragon vehicle is doing what it needs to for re-entry. Another question here, are there Xbox or PlayStations on the International Space Station so astronauts can be gamers? I love this question. I don't know if there are specifically gaming consoles, but I mentioned this last week, but there is an experiment, and I hope you like this, Decisive TV. There is an experiment where they're taking a high-performance computer and bringing it to the space station, and essentially what they're doing is powering it on for a year and seeing if radiation will affect its performance. So I don't know if that's a precursor to space gaming in the future. That would be very cool. But we'll see. We'll see a year from now how that experiment turns out.
Yeah, we unfortunately don't have any gaming consoles for them on the International Space Station. That sounds pretty fun, though.
Yeah.
But like we mentioned, they do have other things to do in their downtime. Some like to continue working on science. I think one of the most popular and favorite pastimes is looking out the window, because who could blame them? As well as sometimes they watch movies, they share meals, and we even know that they play instruments as well.
Yeah, that would be cool. You have, West Coast servers, East Coast servers, then you have a space server. And you're gaming with astronauts. That could be the future. That'd be so cool.
This next question from Daniel, how do astronauts do laundry on the International Space Station? Well, this should be encouragement for anyone who hates doing laundry. You don't have to do laundry on the International Space Station. You can actually just throw your clothes away. So they don't throw them away after one wear. They do try to reuse their clothing. But because we don't really have water that can be disposed of in that amount. We recycle all of our water on the International Space Station, and so we don't have the opportunity to do laundry. So those burn up upon reentry on the Earth's atmosphere when we pack them along with other trash and garbage inside other vehicles like the Northrop Grumman Cygnus, and we just send that back and it disintegrates in the Earth's atmosphere.
That's kind of cool.
Taking out the trash.
If you don't want to do laundry, just become an astronaut.
Exactly.
It's just that simple.
And I love this little view. You can see Crew Dragon there on the right side of your screen. Just a point of light continuing to move away from the International Space Station, with the next burn coming up in about 20 minutes, depart burn 2, which should last 44 seconds.
So again, that is the Dragon capsule. It is quite far from the International Space Station at this point. Again, it passed the two imaginary areas, the Keep Out Sphere and the Approach Ellipsoid, continuing to distance itself in the vastness of space.
And we had an on-time undocking today. The command being sent right at 5:30 p.m. Pacific time, and then undocking coming around 5 minutes later. Those hooks opening, umbilical detaching, and 2 short burns separating Crew Dragon Resilience from the International Space Station, where it has called home since November 15th. Teams here in Mission Control Houston, you can see flight controllers at their consoles monitoring all of the systems aboard the International Space Station. That's a 24-hour, 365-day-a-year job. And that has been for over 20 years now, because that's the amount of time that we've had people living in space. So if you are under 20 years old, there has never been a day that you've been alive without humans in space.
Yeah, I believe the International Space Station just had its 20th anniversary last year and celebrated that. I saw some flags from previous views of, the 20th anniversary of the International Space Station. Quite a long time. It's been orbiting the Earth over and over and over again. When it was initially conceptualized, the space station was essentially built by sending, a piece at a time and attaching it one piece at a time. And it's sort of become, the orbiting laboratory that it is now. Over 300 feet long, and if you look at the solar arrays, they're over 110 feet wide, so to speak. But it is quite a large laboratory with a lot of modules and a lot of science happening on board it.
And a good way to make it visual is if you put the International Space Station on top of an American football field, it would reach from end zone to end zone.
Wow.
So that shows just how big it is.
Yeah.
I love when the astronauts are outside on a spacewalk and they are so small in comparison to the to the solar rays in the background. It's fascinating. And Crew Dragon is now approximately 3.3 kilometers away from the International Space Station. Still has quite a ways to go home, but everything going well so far, with 2 of those departure burns having been